Right, welcome back. This is our third video in today's blog post series where we're creating a cover from scratch. We're getting very close at this point to being able to call this initial compositing phase complete. Let's just do a quick comparison here. This is what we're aiming for, and we're not going to get this far today because we're not going to do typography, and we're not going to do overall image enhancement and post-production, if you want to call it that. We're really just going to focus on getting the scene composited so we have all the elements in place, including the blood dripping from the sky, our city photo, and the clouds looming overhead. That's where we're going. This is where we're at so far. So we're actually getting pretty close. Let's jump into Photoshop and see if we can wrap this up. So what we've done so far, obviously, is we've taken the city image, brushed out the existing sky. We have added a dusky sky color palette behind it with the sky gradient and our background layer, this periwinkle color. We have a few soft lit textures here for cloud layers with this really beautiful sort of thready one over the top. So we're getting close. What we want to start doing now is bringing in all of that really icky, goopy blood that's going to be dripping from the sky. Because remember, this book is a small town murder mystery. What's a small town murder mystery without enormous, just gallons and gallons and thousands of gallons of blood dripping from the sky? So we're going to switch over to our stock, and we're going to start pulling these in. I'm going to begin with the really large goopy blood layer. We're going to drag that into Photoshop. Now, the first thing we're going to notice as we work with this particular image is that it's incredibly vibrant. It's almost primary color in its nature, which is very different from what we're creating here in the book cover. So I'm going to show you a few really simple ways to make that image feel more like it belongs in this scene. As if blood dripping from the sky ever belongs in any scene. And we'll go from there. So let me select the entire thing with Command A, copy it with Command C, close it with Command W. And we are going to paste it in at the top here. Now this is, again, an enormous image. I tend to get the largest image I possibly can when I'm working with stock photography. So this is quite a large piece to begin with. You can see it's easily 4 or 5 times larger than our book cover. I'm going to go ahead and name this one. We're going to call this Blood Goop because it's kind of goopy. And then we're going to turn it off for a moment because I want to do one other thing before we start there. And that's right now we have a very nice dusky feel, pink, this periwinkle color. What we don't have is any trace of red. And before we start adding our blood, we're going to create a new layer that adds the red into our palette. So new layer, Command Shift N, and we're going to call this red gradient. And I'm going to go into my color picker here, which you can get just by clicking these squares. And I'm going to choose sort of a middle of the road red, kind of brick colored, kind of dark like blood, and click OK. Again, I'm going to choose the gradient tool, make sure the gradient is set for solid color to a transparent color, and we're going to drag that gradient so it appears to be coming down from the sky. So I'm going to click up here and hold down Shift as I do, click, drag, still holding Shift, and then release. Now we have some red in our sky, but of course that red is overpowering and it's drowning out our clouds. So just like we did with our clouds before, we're going to change the blend mode to make that red feel like it belongs in the sky. We're going to try the soft light blend, which I think actually kind of works. The red is not meant to feel as if it dominates the sky. It's meant to feel like it belongs in the sky. And adding red to our texture here gives us that sense of red in the clouds. That might be enough. We're going to start there, and then we'll try some things out. So let's go back to our goopy blood And let's see what we can do here to make it feel like it belongs. Now, the goal, let me go back to that test run. The goal is not to make the sky feel like it's just one big mass of inky red blood. Instead, it's meant to feel like the blood exists almost like a layer in the clouds itself, and there are areas where it's just spilling down, threatening to consume the town far below. So we don't want to take an image like our blood goop here and just dominate the sky with it. It's meant to be a small component of the sky. So let's select that layer and let's see what we can do to make that happen. The first thing I'm going to do is change the blend mode to multiply. And already you can see that that sort of gives us something different to work with. If I drag the image around, it takes all of the pale colors of the image and essentially makes them visible to us right here in the image. Pardon me for a moment. And it keeps all of the darker colors visible to us. Okay, so that's a really large image. Obviously, it's taking over the whole screen. So let's look at how we can make it feel a little more like it just belongs. It's too big. So to transform it, we're going to choose Command T on the keyboard. That's our free transform tool. I'm going to hold down Shift, and this time I'm going to hold down Option as well, while I click and drag inward. And that's going to scale from both sides at once. And you can see how that makes it a little bit more palatable to use an image of this size in our cover. It's still a bit big, and you can even see right here, now that I've done this, you can see the borders of that image, where there's a bit of red around the edges that is clouding the scene. So, like I said, this is really, really heavy. It's way too much, and it's also it's a little too solid of a mass, and I want this to feel more like a looming presence. So I'm going to go back to the the Command T, our free transform tool. And you'll notice if you move your mouse outside of a free transform box, it gives you the sort of bent arrow. If I were to click now and drag my mouse around, you can see that it allows me to move an image, to rotate it a bit. And we're going to rotate it so that we get this nice sort of bulgy layer here as the base of our clouds, rather than this giant globule that's falling down to the sky. So I'm going to hit Enter to accept that. Now if we move our blood goop layer higher up on the screen, you can see it gives us a nice layer, an overhang of blood at the top of the screen. So I'm going to do a couple of things really quickly. The first thing is I am going to automatically adjust the tone of the image, which does not appear to have done all that much. So just, again, the way we did that is auto tone or auto contrast, which is Shift Command L or Shift Option Command L. And those things will usually give you that sense of depth that we got out of our clouds earlier. With this image, they're not really doing all that much. That's okay. Sometimes it's not going to give you a big change because the image is well balanced already. What I can tell you is that this image is much too vibrant for where it lives. So we're going to actually adjust the opacity of it. Bring it down just a bit. Right now it's at 100%. We're going to take it down to about 70, maybe 60. That's good. 70 is good. That preserves some of the darker strands without making it too pink or wispy. Okay, I'm going to move it around just a little bit more. Now we have this sort of billow that almost matches the clouds beneath it. I also don't really like how bright it is, so we're going to desaturate the image just a bit. Go into our hue saturation dialog box, which is Command U, or you can go to Image Adjustments and choose Hue Saturation. So I want to take the saturation down by about 20%. So you can see that's already giving it more of a dusky color. So while it feels red, it also feels like it belongs in this image. It doesn't feel like like it's all that alien. And let's see what happens if we darken it just a bit. Oh, that's interesting. You can see how it brings the pale colors of the image out even stronger. So let's not do this, because we don't want to have to brush all of that out. So what I do want to show you is that there are parts of the image that are visible right here. They're very hard to see, and sometimes these things will make it into a design and you won't notice them and no one else will either. But I want to brush those out because I can see a hard edge there that I don't like. So just like we've done before, we're going to use a gradient mask to very simply take that out of the equation. So select your blood goop layer, click the gradient mask, make sure you have black as your foreground color, choose your gradient tool. We're going to change that foreground color again because it had red displayed up there. So black, gradient, solid to transparent. And what we want to do is drag from below this image upward, and that will mask out the bottom pieces that we're seeing. And you only have to do this a couple of times before that edge that we saw is entirely gone. Now nothing else is jumping out at me as needing to be masked with this particular bit of blood. So we're going to call this one good, and we're going to start working with the more drippy bits. So let me save the file. I'm going to switch to Finder and go into our stock folder. And I have a few other pieces here that we're going to use. There's this one, which in its current state feels a little bit like a mushroom cloud. And there's this one, which is a nice collection of different oozy bits that I kind of like because I feel like we can take different pieces of this image to create multiple tendrils of blood in our sky. But let's start with this one. I'm going to drag this into Photoshop. Now, I want to explain the reason that I do it this way instead of dragging it directly into the file, which you can do. If I were to drag it directly into the file, like so, then when it places the image and you hit enter to accept it, it creates what is called a smart object. You can see this icon here. And a smart object, when you double click it, preserves the original image as a separate file so that you can modify the image here however you want. Let's squish it a bit. However, you go back to the original file and it's still using this data to generate the change. Now, the reason I don't like to use smart objects is because they tend to make a file very, very heavy in terms of file size because it's preserving the original image, which is quite large. Let's zoom that to 100%. That is the actual size of that drippy blood stock photo. And working with multiple smart objects means you have multiple files that are 15 megs or 25 megs a piece inside your Photoshop document, which just balloons the size, often makes Photoshop behave a little sluggishly, and in general, it just slows things down, and it can be kind of painful if you need to transfer this file to another person somehow. So that's the reason that I don't use that particular method for bringing a photo in. So I will open the photo independently, select the entire thing, copy it, close it, and then paste it in. Now that gives us a large file, but I can scale that large file, which reduces its weight within the Photoshop file. Now, let's go ahead and do some quick things to this one like we did to the other. We'll do some auto levels. That's Shift Command Option L, by the way. We'll set it to multiply. And we're also going to go into our hue saturation tool. That's Command U. We'll drop the saturation by about 20, just like the first one we worked with. And the first one had an opacity of 70%, so we're going to do the same with this one. Now that's all cool. I'm going to call this blood cloud. That's totally cool, but the problem with this is that our blood appears to be rising from the bottom instead of dripping from the top. So there are a couple of ways we can solve this. We can use the free transform tool to rotate the image. So Command T, and then click outside the image and rotate it until now it's dripping downward, which is kind of cool. That's pretty ominous looking. The other way we can do this is go into Edit, Transform, and then you can choose Rotate, or you can choose these preset rotates. 180 will get you exactly what you need. It'll flip the entire thing 180 degrees. Let's zoom out a little bit. This is too large. The reason I'm zooming out is because the original photo is so large, I want to be able to scale it. So Command T or Free Transform will give you this. I'm going to hold down Shift and Option as I click the anchor point and drag inward. And that's going to give us a nice scaled blood cloud that I'm going to just sort of float over here. Now, let's go compare this very quickly with the test run. Okay, so you can see we're not matching exactly what's in this file, but that's okay. This was more of a proof of concept. So positioning is okay. Like, I want to rotate this a little bit, so Command T, and rotate it just a bit. And it's also a bit big, so I'm also going to scale it back down, like so. Okay. All right. Now, let's add a little bit more. So we're going to go back into our stock folder, and we're going to grab this other file, this particular one with all the different blood tendrils. This is where the fun ones come into play, because this one in particular has a really nice oozy feel to it. And this one as well. This one feels like there's blood in the water and there's no way to escape it. Now, instead of selecting this image like I've shown you with other images, I'm going to just take pieces of this image. You can use a few different tools to do this. I'm going to use the lasso tool. And the lasso tool has a few different settings. We're just going to use the default setting. And it allows you to click and drag. If you hold your mouse down while you're dragging, it's basically going to create a lasso effect. When you release it, you can see we've selected just a piece of the image. And now that we've selected a piece of the image, we can hit Command C to copy it. And I'm going to switch back to the other file and Command V to paste it. All right, let's do the same things we did to the other ones. So Command Option Shift L to auto levels, set it to multiply, drop the opacity to 70%, and then go to the hue saturation dialog and drop the saturation by 20. Hit OK. Okay, now this blood shares roughly the same properties as the other blood that we've already used. I'm going to call this one oozy bit, and we want to rotate it because this feels again like it's rising from the bottom instead of dripping from the top. So Command T, click outside of it, and drag to rotate. You can hold down Shift while you're doing this, and it'll rotate to some predetermined degrees. I'm also going to scale this. So hold down Option and Shift, click the anchor, drag inward. I want this to be noticeable, but not overpowering. I also wanted to hang kind of low in the sky, like right about here, because that's a nice, clean, threatening bit of goop. It's much more defined than some of these cloudy bits. So the problem we have here is that the image isn't quite long enough. Now I could stretch it, and stretching it actually works because this is a relatively abstract image. If you were stretching something like, say, the clock tower, when you stretch it, it becomes apparent that you've stretched it because the clock face will become oval-shaped, and the eagle will turn into a dragon, and so forth. But when you stretch something that's abstract to begin with, you're not really causing a lot of harm because no one knows what this shape should look like, so you don't have that problem. Now, you'll see here at the top that it's entirely apparent that this blood goes right off the page, and this blood kind of fades out but there's nothing anchoring it. Like this blood cloud over here doesn't exist right here to suggest that the drip is coming from a source. So we're going to duplicate this blood goop that we have over here on the right, and we're going to bring it over here. Now, let me remind you, duplicating is Command J, or layer duplicate. And then I've just taken that new layer and dragged it over. Now, the first thing anyone's going to notice is the pattern in the sky. By duplicating it, you've created this recurring shape here that exists here as well. Same pattern here, same pattern here. Anytime you can, you want to avoid people understanding that you've been copy and pasting the same layer over and over. There are ways to do it so it's not noticeable. Like you may have noticed when we duplicated the cloud layer in an earlier video, because we nudged it downward and brushed out the tops of it, you don't recognize patterns in the clouds. Part of it is set against a dark background, part of it is set against a light background. They're positioned in different places. You don't have a lot to worry about. What we're going to do now is take the duplicate that we just made, the blood goop layer, we're going to flip it, and we're going to rotate it so that we can disguise the fact that it's just a duplicate of the same layer. So we're going to delete this mask for the time being. So you can delete it by holding down Control and clicking, or right-clicking, and just choose Delete Mask. All right, and that brought back that awful edge that we masked earlier. Not a big deal because we're going to solve that once we rotate it. So now I've selected the entire thing with the transform bounding box, Command T. I click outside of it, and I'm going to start rotating. And you don't have to go very far before you realize that you've just created a new pattern. And now there are subtleties like this loop here and this loop here that are visible on both sides. We're going to scale this image now to further disguise that. So as you scale it, some of the pattern gets lost. And we're going to bring that right there. And just for kicks, I'm going to flip it. So if you go to the Edit menu, Transform, and just flip horizontal, then you can flip the cloud image a bit. And that'll also hide some of the things you've made. I'm going to rotate it just a bit more. And then drag upward here. Now let's take a closer look at what we've done. Now we have two layers of blood goop. This one here has these familiar shapes along the edge. Those familiar shapes still exist right here. However, they're pointing different directions. They're less immediately noticeable to the eye. And we're going to do a little bit of gradient work later that's going to potentially disguise those a bit more. So I'm comfortable leaving those where they are now. You'll notice with the Uzi bit, however, you still have this very solid line right here of blood that doesn't feel like it's coming from this cloud we've just created, but it feels like it's coming from off screen. So again, the simple way to solve that is a gradient mask. So we've applied a mask to the Uzi layer. Make sure that we select our gradient tool and the color is black. And then we're just going to hold down Shift, click a little off screen, drag, and you'll see how that gently starts to erase the defined edge of that layer. And now it can convincingly feel like it's coming from this, this cloud layer behind it. You can give it a little bit more if you like. All right, let's zoom out and see what we got. Okay, does that look like blood coming from the sky? I think it does. I think we could use a little bit more, but we don't want to overdo it. We don't want this to turn into a splatterfest. It's just, it's meant to be this ominous off-screen thing. So let's go back to this image here, and we're just going to choose maybe one more, and it's going to be this bit here. You'll notice that I selected the lasso tool again. I'm drawing a line around the object I want. When you release that line, you can copy what has just been selected, go back to our other document, and paste it. And there we go. Same tools as before. We're going to do auto levels, so Shift, Command, Option, L. Again, sometimes that will do something, sometimes it won't. It depends on the image. Set the blend mode to multiply. Take the opacity down to 70 and set the hue and saturation to -20. All right, last thing, we're going to give this a name, so let's call this Blorp. It seems like a good name for it. We're going to we're going to flip it. So again, free transform, click and drag around the outside. And now we've got a nice, like, cloudy bit. It's too big, so we're going to scale it. Shift, Option, Command T. Now, these two layers, the blood cloud and the blorp, are a little compete-y. So we can do a couple of things here. The blorp can be flipped horizontal, and it can live elsewhere. This actually might be a nice place for it over here, but that's a really nice looking blorp. And I'd rather put this on the cover than the blood cloud, which feels a little thready and weak. So let's move the blood cloud to the back. So again, here's our bounding lines. This is our back cover. The blood cloud actually feels a little bit more home here in the back. The texture of it fits the texture of these. And the nice thing about moving it to a place like this is it will disguise some of those repeating patterns in the background that we talked about earlier. Now, like the previous one, it's obvious that it's coming from off screen and not from the cloud. So we're going to apply a mask, choose our gradient tool, and we're going to gently brush out some of the top of that so that our blood cloud feels like it belongs in this texture. All right, let's go back to our blorp and let's give it a home. I'm going to flip it back around because I liked the angle of it before. So flip horizontal, and we'll have that coming down from the sky, about right there. Now, the thing I'm noticing is that it's just not quite as ominous here as it is here. So once again, I'm going to take our blood goop and duplicate it. And I'm going to rotate it. You can see some of those edges appearing again. And I'm going to position it here on the side. This gives us a little bit more texture here, so it still feels like that overhang is persistent across the entire cover. We're going to do some masking. So grab our gradient tool again. You'll notice it has a red color up here. We want that to be black. So we'll choose black. And I'm going to mask out from the side here so we get rid of those weird edges that appeared. And that should give us just enough texture for this to feel natural. But the blorp needs its own mask too, because it as well feels like it's coming from off screen and not from the cloud. So here's our blood layer. I think we've got a pretty good thing here. What we need to do is make it feel as if it all kind of belongs together, and we want to mask some of these bits that feel like they're just pasted in. So we're going to create a new layer, Command-Shift-N. We're going to call this gradient for simplicity's sake. We're going to turn the color to black, choose our gradient tool, click and drag downward just a bit. Okay, now we've got this sort of black gradient over the top. It's too heavy, it obscures most of the blood. So we're going to change it to multiply. We're going to drag the layer upward a little bit. Let me show you with it selected so you can see I'm moving the layer. Okay, and that gives us kind of a nice unified darkness up here at the top. Like we did with the city, we're going to duplicate that layer, set the blend mode to soft light, and then we're going to stretch it out just a bit. And let me show you that I'm going to drag it upward a bit. I'm feeling like this is too dark here now, so the original layer, I'm going to bring the opacity down a bit. And I'm going to bring the opacity down on the new layer as well. Okay, so now we have this ominous darkness, and what we don't run the risk of is feeling like some of the more obvious bits, like this leg that goes all the way up. Now it's kind of disguised in shadow where it comes from. This is a little bit disguised as well, so it's not entirely obvious that this is a new layer. I feel like this is a pretty good start, and we're going to be doing some post-production. That's my friendly name for it, but we'll be doing some image enhancements in a future blog post that will unify the entire cover and make it feel like it belongs together. If I were to show you that test run again, you see how the blood, the sky, the city, everything takes on a dominant sort of almost purplish tone. That's the kind of thing we're going to do to our existing cover later on so that we get this kind of result. Now I know it looks like at this point that result is not achievable. That's okay. There's a little bit of magic in what we do next, and I'll show you that in a future post. And we'll get to this. And I do believe that brings us roughly to a good place to stop. I think what I'll do is add a little bit more color tone. Create a new layer, call it wash. Let's get a little bit of blue here. And we're going to create this gradient layer from the bottom, like so. And we're going to hit soft light. All right, that's kind of nice. So let's look at this again. So we've added a little bit of color tone here. It's a little too blue for me, so I'm going to bring it down to about 70. Let's call it 50%. And that gives us a little bit of this sort of colder tone at the bottom. And I just want to reinforce how dark the bottom should be. So I'm going to take that multiply gradient we added earlier, and I'm going to increase it just a bit. So now we have this darker baseline for our city. Now, I'll point out one thing that's sort of bothering me the more I look at this, and it's the blood cloud right there. It feels a little too crisp around the edges, whereas our clouds of blood behind it feel a little bit more distant, a little softer. So I want to take our blood cloud, I'm going to blur it just a little bit so it feels more like it belongs. So you'll see I went to the filter menu, then to blur, and I'm going to select the Gaussian blur, which I really like. That's my favorite kind of blur. And we're going to keep it soft. It doesn't have to be too refined, but around 2 seems good. So if I undo that, you'll see the crispness of that. It's a little unbelievable that something so clean would be falling from the sky. This gives us just a little bit of perspective and distance on that object. Now these objects, on the other hand, I want to keep that crispness too, because they feel a little bit foreground to me. And I'd like to keep the depth that's suggested by some elements being farther back than others. I'm also going to take this blood cloud and desaturate it just a little bit more. And that makes me feel a little bit happier about how it lives in this overall palette. It feels pretty good. So let's stop here. I'm going to close up that art folder because we won't be touching it anymore. Save this file. And we'll come back in a future blog post. We'll do some post-production on this image. And then in a post after that, we'll start to look at typography and we'll lay out the entire book cover from start to finish. So you can see how we get from the simple act of compositing a scene from basic stock photography all the way to a finished product that you can deliver to CreateSpace or a printer. So thank you very, very much for watching my inaugural tutorial video. I hope it hasn't been too intolerant or intolerable, and I hope I haven't mumbled too much. I tend to do that. So thanks for watching, and be sure to subscribe to the blog to keep watching the Do-It-Yourself cover series. There's plenty more to come.